So this year's kit for kids of New Mexico from the Office of Archaeological Studies is not in a box, it's in an envelope, and it's called Food and Land. It's based on curriculum out of Project Archaeology, which is a Bureau of Land Management national program that provides archaeology-based curriculum for kids. And what we did was pick parts that we thought were our favorites and make up some other activities and shorten it a great deal. The original curriculum is like 7 lessons, and we have 4, including some that are entirely our own invention. So in this kit, kids explore something that, in my experience, neither kids nor adults really pay a lot of attention to, namely where their food comes from. And so we look at that both contemporaneously and in the prehistoric past. So in this kit, there's a fairly long curriculum that kids get, and in the first activity they look at where their food comes from, and they have a food diary that they keep for 3 days, and they look at well, really 2 things. One is what actual ingredients make up the food that they eat. For instance, pizza has got wheat in the crust and tomatoes in the sauce and milk in the cheese. And so then they also have a QRT to lead them to data that will tell them where these ingredients are produced in abundance in North America and Mexico. And since a lot of our food here in New Mexico comes from Mexico, we felt like we needed to include that. So after 3 days of collecting that data, they are going to look at which states are producing most of the food that they eat, and they have and they'll color code those states according to the abundance of different food products, and they have colored pencils to do that with, and they'll end up with a very pretty map which will probably show them that very little of what they eat ultimately comes from New Mexico. So that's a curious thing in and of itself. Then they'll make a graph based on which states have the most different food products that they actually eat. So in the second lesson, they're looking at the organization of activities in their own home kitchen, which you can imagine is a direct prelude to analyzing an archaeological site and the distribution of artifacts in space that humans occupy. So we give them a map of a hypothetical kitchen, but probably more fun than that, they have some actual graph paper from the Office of Archaeological Studies fieldwork that they can use with a ruler that has metric as well as English measurements on it, that they can use to either map their own kitchen or make one up, and what would be the elements that would be part of your kitchen. And with that lesson, we provide kids with a pile of what we call artifacts, kitchen artifacts and supplies. So they have little cutouts that they can make of essentially a service for 4 of dishes, some little plastic food elements, tiny paper towels and a sponge, can of tomatoes, dishcloth, cutting board, and a bunch of colored clay that they can use to make little tiny 3-dimensional things, whatever they think ought to be in their kitchen. And so they'll populate their map of either the hypothetical kitchen or their very own one, and then use the distribution of the artifacts to talk about what jobs happen in their kitchen and how they're organized. and they'll be able to think about cooking, storing, and cutting things up and putting them on the table to eat, all that stuff. They'll be thinking about their own experience that they have every day and how it's organized. And that's a really good prelude to thinking about how archaeologists analyze material culture data that they excavate. So in lesson 3, it's called Investigating Prehistoric Hunting and Gathering, and this is using a particular archaeological site, the O'Malley Rock Shelter in Nevada, and also an interview with a Paiute woman who's particularly interested in ethnobotany and how plants were used in the past. So they have some interesting stuff to read about plants in the past, and also about geography and ecosystems of the Great Basin, what different food resources are present in the landscape and why. And then there's a bunch of images of different animal resources that were hunted and plant resources that are associated with that rock shelter. And then the kids can cut apart those different resources with a little description of each one, and assemble them, organize them on a table that's labeled collecting data that shows what different resources there are for interpreting the past and how space was used in that O'Malley Rock Shelter. And then they have writing that goes along with that lesson, as well as the previous 2 lessons about reflections about their own experience in utilizing food in their lives, and comparing that with the rock shelter. The final lesson is called New Mexico Menus, Then and Now, and it involves kids coming up with, using their knowledge now of what different resources were available in the past in the Southwest desert, and how that compares with their own house, and artifacts that find their way into their kitchen in certain places. They look at, and also they're provided with some information about listing different resources at different points in the past. And so they create a menu based on available ingredients in the past, and it will be surprising and probably shocking it to think of, that's all you have that you can eat, and this is what it's going to taste like. Not much, no salt, no chili, and then compare it with a meal that they make up for with all the ingredients that are available to them today. And our experience with working with kids with that kind of assignment is it's a real eye-opener and really makes them think about food in the past and how it compares with their own experience.